The air hung thick with the scent of pine and simmering resentment. Outside, the snow fell in heavy, silent flakes, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I watched my family through the restaurant window, their laughter echoing, a cruel symphony designed to exclude me. They thought they'd finally broken me, that years of being their safety net, their rock, had finally worn me down to nothing. They were wrong. They had merely lit the fuse. If your siblings are your best friends, subscribe now. My name is Willow, and for years I was the family fixer, the one everyone called when they were in trouble. Need a loan? Willow would find a way. Facing eviction? Willow would co-sign. Car trouble? Willow was there with jumper cables and a sympathetic ear. I was the dependable one, the strong one, the one who always put family first. But that Christmas, I learned a harsh lesson. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, and family doesn't always mean loyalty. It all started with a simple invitation to Christmas dinner at a fancy restaurant, a place my father had always dreamed of going. He finally had the money, thanks in no small part to me, and he wanted to celebrate with family. I arrived bundled in my warmest coat, a gift in hand, ready to share in the holiday cheer. But as I scanned the long, elegantly set table, I noticed something was missing, a chair for me. I stood there, awkwardly holding my gift, as my father approached, a smug look on his face. "Willow," he said, his voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that immediately set my teeth on edge. "I'm sorry, dear, but we only have seats for family." The laughter that followed felt like a physical blow. My siblings, my cousins, even my own mother joined in, their eyes glinting with a cruel amusement I had never seen before. It was then, standing there in the doorway, exposed and humiliated, but I understood the depth of their betrayal. I wasn't family. I was a convenience, a resource, a stepping stone. And now that they had what they wanted, they were discarding me like a worn-out shoe. I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I simply nodded, placed the gift on a nearby table, and walked away, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears, fueling the fire of my burgeoning rage. I said nothing. I showed nothing. But inside, something shifted. The years of resentment, the countless times I had sacrificed my own needs for theirs, the sting of their constant condescension, it all coalesced into a single burning desire: revenge. The sting of their rejection followed me home, a constant, gnawing ache in my chest. Sleep offered no escape, only a relentless replay of their mocking laughter and my father's dismissive words. Each night I tossed and turned, the silence of my apartment amplifying the echoes of their betrayal. I tried to reason with myself, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, a cruel joke gone too far. But the memory of their faces, the undisguised contempt in their eyes, shattered any hope of reconciliation. The financial strain began to tighten its grip. I had poured so much of my savings into bailing them out over the years, co-signing loans for my brother's failed business ventures, covering my sister's mounting credit card debt, and even contributing to my parents' dream retirement fund, a dream that now apparently excluded me. The calls started coming, creditors hounding me for payments on debts I had guaranteed. My own bills began to pile up, the weight of their financial irresponsibility threatening to crush me. I tried talking to them, reaching out with a desperate plea for understanding, for help, but my calls went unanswered, my texts ignored. When I finally managed to corner my mother at the grocery store, she simply shrugged, her eyes cold and distant. "You'll figure it out, Willow," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth or concern. "You always do." It was then I realized the true extent of their manipulation. They had deliberately bled me dry, exploiting my generosity and then discarding me when I was no longer of use. Desperation clawed at me. I considered selling my apartment, the only sanctuary I had left, but even that wouldn't be enough to cover the debts. I thought about taking on a second job, sacrificing what little remained of my personal life, but the exhaustion was already overwhelming. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of their betrayal and my own dwindling resources. One evening, I sat alone in my darkened living room, staring blankly at the flickering television screen, the sound muted. A news report flashed across the screen, detailing a corporate scandal, a story of greed and deception. As I watched, a spark ignited within me. If they could play dirty, so could I. I began to meticulously document everything, every loan, every payment, every promise they had made. I scoured my emails, my text messages, searching for any shred of evidence that could expose their deceit. I knew it was a risky game, one that could potentially backfire and leave me even more vulnerable. But the thought of them getting away with it, of them continuing to live their lavish lives while I struggled to survive, was unbearable. The need for justice, for retribution, consumed me. I started small, quietly investigating their financial dealings, uncovering a web of hidden accounts and questionable transactions. The more I dug, the more I discovered, the extent of their greed and duplicity far exceeding my initial suspicions. It was a slow, painstaking process, fraught with setbacks and dead ends. But with each new piece of evidence, my resolve grew stronger, my determination hardening into a steely focus. They thought I was broken, defeated. They thought I would simply fade away, quietly accepting my fate. But they underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my silence for submission, and they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I was no longer the naive, trusting Willow they had taken advantage of for so long. I was something else entirely, a force to be reckoned with, a storm brewing on the horizon, and the storm was about to break. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp white rectangle that sliced through the already fragile illusion of normalcy I was clinging to. It sat on my kitchen counter like a tombstone, a final, brutal confirmation of my descent. I felt numb, beyond tears, beyond anger, just an empty shell drifting through the motions of a life that no longer felt like my own. The weight of their betrayal had become a physical burden, crushing me under its immense pressure. I lost my appetite, food turning to ash in my mouth. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford, haunted by nightmares of financial ruin and the mocking faces of my family. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed, a stark reminder of the price I was paying for their selfishness. I tried to find work, pounding the pavement, submitting countless applications, but the rejections piled up, each one a fresh wound to my already battered spirit. The few interviews I managed to secure were humiliating, the interviewers' pitying glances mirroring the disdain I had seen in my family's eyes. The world seemed determined to kick me while I was down, to revel in my misery. One particularly bleak afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly through a park, the once vibrant green now muted by the encroaching winter. The laughter of children playing nearby felt like a cruel taunt, a reminder of the joy I had lost, the life that had been stolen from me. I sat on a park bench, the cold seeping into my bones, a profound sense of despair washing over me. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I considered simply giving up, letting the darkness consume me entirely. The thought was a seductive whisper, promising an end to the pain, an escape from the relentless torment. But then a memory flickered in my mind, my grandmother, a woman of unwavering strength and resilience, who had faced unimaginable hardship with grace and determination. She had taught me the importance of fighting for what you believe in, of never surrendering to adversity. Her words echoed in my heart, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. I opened my eyes, a newfound resolve hardening my gaze. I would not let them win. I would not allow their betrayal to define me. I would fight back, not with violence or malice, but with cunning and strategy. I would expose their lies, their deceit, and their greed for the world to see. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information I had gathered, searching for a way to turn the tables, to use their own arrogance against them. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. They would simply deny everything, twist the narrative to their advantage. I needed to find a way to expose their crimes publicly, to strip them of their carefully constructed facade of respectability. An idea began to form, a daring, audacious plan that would require meticulous planning and unwavering execution. I started by creating a detailed spreadsheet, meticulously documenting every transaction, every conversation, every piece of evidence I had collected. I organized the information into a coherent narrative, a damning indictment of their financial malfeasance. I knew that simply presenting the evidence wouldn't be enough. I needed to find a way to amplify my voice, to reach a wider audience. I started researching online platforms, forums, and social media groups where I could anonymously share my story. I learned about data encryption, secure communication channels, and other techniques to protect my identity and prevent them from silencing me. It was a risky undertaking, fraught with potential dangers, but the thought of seeing them held accountable for their actions fueled my determination. I knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but I was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The naive, trusting Willow was gone, replaced by a hardened, resourceful strategist. The fire of revenge burned brightly within me, a constant reminder of the pain they had inflicted and the justice I sought. The darkness had tried to consume me, to break me, but it had failed. Instead, it had forged me into something stronger, something more dangerous, and they were about to find out just how dangerous I could be. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my silence for submission. Now they would pay the price for their arrogance. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. The first step was securing irrefutable proof. I needed more than just spreadsheets and angry texts. I needed recordings. My siblings and parents had a habit of meeting at my father's country club, a place dripping with the kind of ostentatious wealth they pretended to despise. I knew their conversations there would be full of self-congratulation and careless admissions. My plan was simple: plant hidden cameras and microphones to capture their incriminating words. I purchased miniature, high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a pen, a USB charger, even a decorative rock I planned to place in the club's garden near their favorite meeting spot. The microphones were even more discreet, small enough to be hidden inside flower pots or tucked beneath table linens. Getting them into the club was the tricky part. I couldn't risk being seen, so I enlisted the help of an old friend, Sarah, who worked as a waitress there. I explained the situation, carefully omitting the details of my revenge plan, and appealed to her sense of justice. Sarah, who had always been fiercely loyal and empathetic, agreed to help, no questions asked. Over the next few weeks, Sarah discreetly planted the devices, taking advantage of her access to the club's restricted areas. She sent me regular updates, confirming that the cameras were in place and functioning properly. The tension was almost unbearable. Every notification from Sarah was a shot of adrenaline, a mixture of excitement and fear. I knew that if I was caught, my plan would be ruined, and I would likely face legal consequences. But the thought of exposing their lies kept me going. With the cameras in place, I began to collect the recordings. I spent hours poring over the footage, fast-forwarding, rewinding, and transcribing every word. The things they said were even worse than I had imagined. They openly bragged about manipulating me, about exploiting my generosity for their own gain. They mocked my financial struggles, reveling in my misfortune. My vision blurred, the glass in my hand shattered. Their callousness was breathtaking, their cruelty beyond comprehension. The recordings confirmed everything I suspected, and more. They had been systematically defrauding investors in my brother's failed company, siphoning off funds for their own personal use. My sister had been using forged documents to obtain credit cards and loans, racking up massive debts in my name, and my parents had been secretly transferring assets to offshore accounts, shielding their wealth from taxes and creditors. The evidence was overwhelming, a mountain of proof that would bury them if it ever came to light. But simply having the evidence wasn't enough. I needed to find a way to present it to the authorities in a way that would ensure they would be held accountable. I contacted a lawyer, posing as a potential whistleblower, and explained my situation without revealing my identity. The lawyer listened intently, asking probing questions about the nature of the evidence and the potential legal ramifications. He advised me to gather as much documentation as possible and to consult with a forensic accountant to analyze the financial data. I followed his advice, meticulously compiling all the evidence into a comprehensive report. I hired a forensic accountant, again under a false name, to examine their financial records and identify any irregularities. The accountant's findings were damning. He uncovered a complex web of fraudulent transactions, hidden assets, and illegal activities that spanned several years. With the report in hand, I felt a surge of confidence. I had everything I needed to bring them down. The final piece of the puzzle was choosing the right moment to strike. I knew that I couldn't simply dump the evidence on the authorities and hope for the best. I needed to create a media frenzy to ensure that their crimes were exposed to the widest possible audience. I decided to leak the information to a local investigative journalist, a reporter known for his tenacity and his commitment to uncovering corruption. I contacted him anonymously, providing him with a brief overview of the case and a sample of the evidence. He was immediately intrigued and agreed to meet with me in person under the condition of strict confidentiality. The meeting was tense, fraught with risk. I revealed my identity, explaining my motives and my plan. The journalist listened intently, his eyes widening as he absorbed the full extent of their crimes. He agreed to publish the story, promising to protect my identity and to hold them accountable for their actions. The waiting was the hardest part. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing from the journalist. I began to fear that he had abandoned the story, that my plan had failed. Then, one morning, I received a phone call. It was the journalist. He told me that the story was ready to be published. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The article hit the newsstands and the internet like a tactical strike. The headlines screamed my family's misdeeds to the world, their faces plastered across every screen. The story detailed their fraudulent schemes, their hidden assets, and their calloused exploitation of me, complete with excerpts from the recordings and copies of the financial documents. It was a comprehensive exposé, leaving no room for doubt or denial. I watched from the shadows as their world began to crumble. My brother's company, already teetering on the brink of collapse, went into immediate receivership. Investors, furious at being deceived, filed lawsuits demanding their money back. My sister's credit cards were canceled, her assets frozen, and she was facing multiple charges of fraud and forgery. My parents, their reputation in tatters, were ostracized by their social circle, their lavish lifestyle abruptly curtailed. But the most satisfying moment came when the authorities launched a full-scale investigation into their financial affairs. Their homes were raided, their records seized, and they were summoned to appear before a grand jury. They denied everything, of course, accusing me of fabricating the evidence, of orchestrating a malicious smear campaign. But their denials rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. The public, outraged by their greed and duplicity, turned against them. Protesters gathered outside their homes, chanting slogans and waving signs. Their names became synonymous with corruption and deceit. I knew my family would never admit their guilt, but I didn't need them to. The truth was out there for everyone to see. They had lost everything: their money, their reputation, their freedom, and I had finally found justice.
But even as I watched their downfall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Yes, I had exposed their crimes, but I hadn't truly made them suffer. I hadn't made them feel the pain they had inflicted on me. I needed to find a way to take my revenge to the next level, to make them understand the consequences of their actions. An opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. My father, desperate to salvage what remained of his reputation, reached out to me, begging me to recant my accusations, to publicly exonerate him and my family. He promised to make amends, to repay the money they had stolen from me. He even offered to cut ties with my siblings, blaming them for everything that had happened. I pretended to consider his offer, leading him on, playing into his desperation. I knew that he was lying, that he would never truly change, but I also knew that his desperation could be used against him. I agreed to meet with him in person, at a secluded location far from the prying eyes of the media. I told him that I would only consider his offer if he provided me with irrefutable proof that he was willing to make amends. I demanded that he transfer all of his remaining assets into my name as a sign of his good faith. He hesitated, of course, but his desperation ultimately outweighed his greed. He agreed to my terms, promising to sign the transfer documents at our meeting. I knew this was my chance. This was the moment to spring my trap. The meeting was set for a remote cabin in the mountains, a place my father had often used for clandestine affairs. I arrived early, ensuring that the cabin was thoroughly wired with hidden cameras and microphones. I wanted to capture every word, every gesture, every expression on his face. I wanted to document his downfall in excruciating detail. As my father arrived, his eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He greeted me with a false display of affection, showering me with insincere apologies. I played along, pretending to believe his lies. We sat down at a table, and he produced the transfer documents, his hands trembling slightly. As he began to sign the papers, I calmly revealed my true intentions. I told him that I had no intention of exonerating him or my family, that I was simply using him to gather more evidence against them. I told him that the cabin was wired with cameras and microphones, and that every word he spoke was being recorded. I watched as his face contorted with rage and disbelief. He lunged at me, his eyes filled with hate. but I was prepared. I had hired a security team to protect me, and they quickly subdued him. As he was being dragged away, he screamed curses and threats, vowing to make me pay for what I had done. I simply smiled. I had won. The evidence I had gathered at the cabin was the final nail in their coffin. It proved beyond any doubt that they were guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and a host of other offenses.
The authorities wasted no time in pressing charges, and they were all eventually convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. They had finally paid the price for their crimes. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. I wanted to make sure that they never forgot what they had done to me, that they lived with the shame and guilt for the rest of their lives. I used the money I had recovered from them to establish a foundation to help victims of financial fraud and abuse. I named the foundation after my grandmother, the woman who had taught me the importance of fighting for justice. And with that, I was done. The day they tried to end me was the day they ended themselves. My ultimate move was about to unfold. I waited until their sentencing hearing, the courtroom packed with reporters, their faces pale and drawn. As the judge read out the verdicts, their carefully constructed facade of respectability shattered. My brother, the golden boy, was sentenced to 15 years for fraud and embezzlement. My sister, the socialite, received a 10-year sentence for forgery and identity theft. My parents, the masterminds, were handed down 20-year sentences for conspiracy and tax evasion. But it wasn't just the prison sentences that broke them. It was the public humiliation, the complete and utter destruction of their lives. As they were led away in handcuffs, their eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of recognition, a dawning understanding of the magnitude of their betrayal. My mother's face, once so full of arrogance, crumbled. My father's eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now filled with a desperate fear. My siblings, once so dismissive of me, stared in disbelief. They had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. But I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to make sure that they understood the full extent of their crimes, that they knew exactly what they had taken from me. After the hearing, I held a press conference outside the courthouse. I told my story, in detail, recounting every instance of abuse, every act of betrayal, every lie they had told. I showed the world the recordings, the documents, the evidence that proved their guilt beyond any doubt. I spoke not with anger, but with a quiet determination. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't seeking revenge for revenge's sake. I was seeking justice. I was standing up for myself and for all those who had been victimized by their greed and corruption. The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life reached out to me, sharing their own stories of betrayal and abuse. They thanked me for giving them a voice, for showing them that it was possible to fight back against injustice. My foundation became a beacon of hope for victims of financial fraud, providing them with legal assistance, emotional support, and the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. My actions triggered a wave of investigations into similar cases of corporate corruption and financial malfeasance. Other victims, emboldened by my example, came forward with their own stories, exposing a network of deceit and exploitation that had been hidden for years. My family's downfall became a cautionary tale, a warning to those who thought they could get away with betraying others. They lost everything: their freedom, their wealth, their reputation, their family. They were left with nothing but the knowledge of their own guilt and the consequences of their actions. They were removed from society. They were silenced. They had tried to erase me, but instead, they had erased themselves. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's the force that rights wrongs when no one else will. It's the shield for the defenseless and the sword for the wronged. It is the only language some understand. They broke me, underestimated me, and thought they could bury me. They were wrong. They learned that kindness should not be mistaken for weakness, and silence should not be mistaken for consent. The naive Willow is gone, and in her place stands someone who knows the true cost of betrayal and is prepared to ensure no one else pays that price again. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.